This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
Weekly Wrap is the week in news and what's coming up. I'm Larissa Moore.
And I'm Claire Kimball.
Senators crossing the floor and quitting parties. 3 big international elections. Claire, are you as happy as a pig in mud right now or what?
Yep, I love a bit of mud in weeks like this. Politics has just been huge here and overseas this week, so there's no getting around it. We'll give you the fallout from Fatima Payman's departure from the Labor Party, also what's happening with big elections in the United States, the United Kingdom and France.
Just a couple of big countries with some big things going on. We'll also take a look at what's coming up. Hold on for that. There's some fun stuff to know about. And we're going to get you a bit more across Newsmakers, our upcoming News Club series. As always, a couple of recommendations.
Yep, there sure are. So let's do it.
Most clicked link in the Squiz Today newsletter this week was of a kinkajou that was rescued off a highway over in the US.
And if, like me, you've gone kinka what?
Kinka what now?
Never heard
Kinka
of
who?
these things. Very cute little animal, sort of like a cross between a monkey and a little bear, I think is probably the best way to describe it. Looks like a few squizzers had heard of it either. So there was a lot of clicks on that link.
Lots of clicks. If it's piqued your curiosity, I'll put the link in your episode notes. But let's jump over to the biggest story of the week, Claire, and that is Fatima Payman, who got off the Labor train this week.
Yeah, she really did. You could say that she was also on the side of a highway.
Maybe off the Labor
if
bus
we need
then.
to join those two stories together.
Good segue. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This has been a really big one. And look, Fatima Payman has been in the news a lot since she crossed the floor in the Senate on a vote on Palestinian statehood last week.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit to explain to get a handle on why this has been such a big deal. What I want to start with is, who is she? Tell us a bit about her.
Yeah, I think that's a fair enough question just to start there. So Fatima Payman is a first-term senator from Western Australia. It means that she was elected in the 2022 election. She's 29 years old. She was born in Kimball in Afghanistan, of course the capital there. Her grandfather was a member of that country's parliament way back. So she's got, a bit of a heritage of being politically engaged. Her family fled the Taliban when she was a young kid. They ended up in Pakistan. Her father then arrived in Australia via boat in 1999, spent time in immigration detention, and he was found to be a refugee. He was able to bring his family to Perth in 2003.
Timing is a funny thing because, of course, if he'd arrived in 2001 when Howard's offshore immigration processing policy came in, he might not have been able to settle here.
Yeah, exactly right. That's part of her story, I guess.
Yeah.
For Payman, she became involved in Labor politics quite early on in her life. She got a job in an electorate office of a state Western Australian Member of Parliament. She was very active in Young Labor, and that really takes us up to the 2022 election.
Yeah, which probably shouldn't have been a big deal for Payman because she made it onto the Senate ticket for Labor, but in the 3rd spot. Now, Claire, you and I have done a bunch of Squiz the Election podcast series over the years. And
we have.
We delve into the intricacies of Senate ticket spots and all of that. Go into why the significance of this 3rd spot is a thing.
Yeah, so really, she was positioning for a run in the future. It was just a good way for her to get exposure to Western Australian voters, but also to be seen more as a senior player, I guess, or a player in the Labor Party, within the Labor Party itself. Just looking at Western Australia, it's traditionally very friendly to the coalition. Last election was a regular one, so they were electing 6 senators to start that term in 2022. The idea that Labor could get 3 senators up from that ticket is extraordinary. And if you cast your memory back, of course, things weren't particularly good for the coalition when it comes to Western Australia last election.
No, they did very badly in the West. So Labor got 3 Senate spots.
Yeah, which is very, very unusual. And looking at that data, though, from that election, she got 1,600 votes personally. So they're people who voted below the line and put a number 1 preference next to her name. The reason why she got elected was because enough Western Australians voted for the Labor Party above the line. And that's where she got that third spot.
She became the Australian Parliament's first hijab-wearing Muslim woman. Reading about her a bit more this week, it seems that she made some good friends in the Labor caucus, including senior women like Tanya Plibersek, Penny Wong, Katie Gallagher. They say they tried to support her as the war in Gaza rolled on.
Yeah, and we've talked on this podcast and on the Squiz today quite a bit about how huge the protests, I guess, and this war in Gaza question, how divisive it's been. It's also been an issue for Fatima Payman when it comes to her Senate seat and how she's talked about this with her colleagues. The rise of this sort of pro-Palestine movement, it's reached beyond the parliament and right into the community. And in the past few weeks, Payman has really been that person from our federal parliament who has been quite vocal about that. A few weeks ago, she made quite strident statements and she was asked to basically sort of check herself by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese even. He was forced to come out and say that he didn't agree with her. She was quite stridently anti-Israel and very pro-Palestine. The last couple of weeks, though, it's really come to a head.
Yeah, so last week she crossed the floor on a Greens motion to recognise Palestinian statehood. Just to explain that, it means she voted against her own party when both Labor and the coalition joined to defeat the motion. If you're in the coalition, crossing the floor isn't that big of a deal. It happens, but the results aren't usually disastrous. If you're in Labor, it's a huge deal to cross the floor.
Yeah, and that's because if you're a Labor member of Parliament, there are rules about this. You are prevented from crossing the floor. It's actually a really big deal to do that, and that's why it's been such a crisis for Labor in the last week or so. If you're a casual observer of politics, you might be surprised that it's such a big deal for Labor, but it sort of goes to the culture of the parties, and for Labor, solidarity is really their key. If you're in the parliament as their member, you have to go along with what the leadership decides. So that's why she was suspended from the party room when she crossed the floor last week.
And at this point, she hasn't been kicked out of the party or anything. She's still a Labor Party member. She's just been suspended from the party room.
Yeah, exactly. But it became untenable this week because last weekend she did an interview on Insiders. What she said was she would continue to cross the floor if that motion continued to be put up in the Senate, which is what the Greens said that they were going to do. They were going to keep putting that motion before the Senate. That put Labor in a very difficult position. So she went and had a meeting with the Prime Minister. There was a big question mark hanging around all week about how that would be resolved. And we got that answer on Thursday when she quit the party. This is the quote. She said, "I am pressured to conform to caucus solidarity and toe the party line. I see no middle ground and my conscience leaves me no choice."
Yep, she's out of the Labor Party. We can't just leave it there though, it's not quite as simple. There's been a lot of talk that her move this week was actually planned for quite a while, about a month or so the talk is, and that she's going to join forces with a group called the Muslim Vote, which is a grassroots organisation with plans to endorse independence with pro-Palestinian stances.
Yeah, so kind of like the group behind the Teals and what they did last election, but with this sort of pro-Palestine tint. The interesting thing about that is those candidates, if they do stand, they would take votes away from Labor MPs. The plan is to actually target ministers from the Labor government as a way of pressuring the government as they currently stand to change its stand on the war in Gaza and its support for Israel.
So with Payman quitting the party, she could become a bit of a lightning rod for candidates who will go on to damage Labor at the ballot box. So big picture could start to have a bit of an impact on politics. Pretty good news if you're Peter Dutton, some of this chaos.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone saw Peter Dutton actually dancing a jig in the corridors this week. But yeah, the coalition is a potential winner out of all of this, electorally speaking anyway. As for Payman, she says she's not decided about what steps she's going to take and who she might partner with when it comes to the next election. Lots of questions about how that will play out.
Yeah, lots still to come. But that's where we'll leave domestic politics for now. Let's head over to international politics. Claire, an embarrassment of political riches for you this week as we head into international politics and elections overseas.
Look, it really has been, and I feel very, very lucky for this. I hope other people feel that way too. I have a feeling Kate's on her short break thinking, oh, I go away for a week and Claire's turned this into a politics podcast. But look, I really haven't. It's just how the news fell this week.
Yeah, totally.
That's my position and I'm sticking with it.
Oh, look, we talked at length in our production meeting about what news needed to be wrapped up this week, and we really couldn't go past the elections in the UK, the second round of voting that's going to happen in France over the weekend, and then, of course, the fallout from the presidential debate in the US. Question now is, where are we going to start?
It's a good question. I reckon we can let Squizzes guide us this week. So in our News Club poll from our email that went out on Monday, 65% said that the United States election is the one that they're most interested in. So that's probably a good place to start.
That's some good hard data. Let's start there. This time last week, we were in the office when this first presidential debate was on. You said, Larissa, get over to my desk and have a look at this. The debate hadn't even started yet. It was just Trump and Biden walking out on the stage, and it nearly said everything you needed to know about how it was going to go.
Yeah, I think that's right. I watched the whole thing later on, of course, but I reckon you just needed to watch those first few minutes just to get a sense of that visual of these guys. And, of course, it brings together all of the commentary about them being two older men. But of course, the focus was on Joe Biden. To see him on stage was really quite something. To hear him was a whole other thing.
Yeah, he had lots of unfinished thoughts. He wasn't what you would call coherent in a lot of his answers. And again, it comes right back to this question of how old is too old. And it's been a big question that's shadowed Biden over his campaign. One of the comments that got me was from a Democratic commentator called Van Jones. He said, I love Joe Biden, but that hurt. Biden's job in this debate really was to restore confidence of the country and of the base, and he failed to do that. That's what Jones said.
Yeah, and that really is the sense of how things have really fallen after that debate and where the discussion is at, not just from the whole sort of, I guess, inside and outside of the party, but when it comes to voters, because there's been a couple of polls since then too that really does show a spike in support for Donald Trump when they're asked about who you're going to support, and also those questions about Joe Biden's age. It's pretty extraordinary stuff. So when you think about who could replace him, of course, his age is one thing. What are they going to do about it is a whole other thing. There is a way for the Democrats to actually do that at their convention, which is in sort of mid to late August. However, that's really, really messy to do. It seems that the only way that they would replace Biden is if he steps down.
And this week he has really dug in. He said he's not going to step down. He's fully in the race. One thing to put on your radar is that mid-morning today he'll be doing an interview. What's significant about this is it will be unscripted. His appearances since the debate have all had a teleprompter. So there's going to be lots of eyes watching just how he's going to perform.
Yeah, it's a live interview. He's given very few live interviews during his whole term as president. So lots of eyes on that one for sure.
All right, next up on the list, the UK. The results will get a little bit clearer when we hit publish on the podcast, but as far as it stands, the Conservatives are out and Labor are in.
The official count hasn't been done, but there's been a big exit poll that has been paid for by a consortium of media outlets, so the BBC, Sky News, ITV. It actually asks voters how they just voted. So just to give you a sense of the numbers, there are 650 seats in the UK Parliament. The poll points to Keir Starmer's Labor winning about 410 seats. That more than doubles their representation, and it's one of the biggest wins in the party's history. For the Conservatives, it looks like they're going to go from 365 seats to 130-ish. That makes it one of their biggest defeats in history. And just one more thing to note, Nigel Farage and his Reform UK party, they're a new party. They didn't run at the last election. They've picked up 13 seats. He's a Brexiteer. His philosophy is to the right of the Conservatives. So Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives really copped it from both sides.
Now, Claire, in your excellent News Club newsletter this week, you had a couple of great reads on their incoming PM, Keir Starmer. He is a former human rights lawyer, not exactly known for his charisma.
Look, it's long been speculated that he was Helen Fielding's inspiration for the Mark Darcy character in the Bridget Jones series.
Yep.
That's probably the most exciting thing about him. But even in the book, he's a rather dry human rights lawyer.
And even though that's the most interesting thing about it, the author Helen Fielding came out and said that it wasn't
That's not
true.
true.
So she's debunked that. Would have been great if it was true, though. The other thing that's lacking charisma is the handover of power in the UK.
Yeah, so for a country that loves all things pomp and ceremony, it's pretty lacking when it comes to this. The outgoing Prime Minister, they get a final audience with the King, and then when you sort of get back in your ministerial car back to 10 Downing Street, basically the removal trucks are there taking your stuff away, and the new Prime Minister is able to bunk on in. It happens within a very, very tight time frame. There's a bit of a press conference and you walk in the front door and basically that's it.
That's that. Transfer of power done. You can only imagine the pace of the moving trucks behind the scenes.
Yeah, and if you're Rishi Sunak and his family at the moment, you can't pack because you don't want to give some sort of indication to your colleagues or to voters that you think you're going to lose. So, yeah, it's on stealth.
They've had a bit of practice at packing up prime ministers and moving the new ones in recently, so well practiced. Over to France, though, another super significant election, and again, one of the club picks in the News Club newsletter said it all for me, really. It said all elections are important, but some are earth-shaking. Now, how's that for a setup?
Yeah, and look, you can be forgiven for not being all over France's politics.
They're complicated.
I think you can do that. But look, what they're talking about is this being one of the most consequential votes in France's history, certainly since World War II. At stake is whether the far right will form government in France as a majority. That would be the first time since the Vichy regime it collaborated with the Nazis in World War II. So it's really history making what's going on there.
Yeah, and that's if Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party gains an absolute majority in the National Assembly. That party's potential future Prime Minister is a 28-year-old named Jordan Bardella. There's a little bit to explain here.
Yeah, there really is. So look, just to give you the talking points, let's start with why it's worth paying attention to. So France is a really powerful nation. It's critical to the European Union. It's critical to NATO, which of course is that security alliance with Western Europe across to North America. Its colonial past means that it's got a lot of fingers in global pies, particularly in the developing world. Who's in charge and what their agenda is has impacts beyond their own borders.
And Marine Le Pen, let's just come back to her because her name comes up a lot.
Yeah, it really does. And I guess, again, the potted history on that is that party, the National Rally Party, it was founded in the 70s by her father. His name was Jean-Marie Le Pen. He ran for president a number of times. He was a really big figure in France's politics from the 70s right up to 2011 when he resigned. So he'd been around a long time. His daughter is Marine Le Pen. She's had a go at president a couple of times as well. She got actually quite close to Emmanuel Macron last time. What she has done since she really became the spearhead of that national rally movement is to make their policies a little bit more mainstream. The National Rally has been known for being racist and being anti-Semitic. So she's really tried to pull them sort of back into mainstream voters. The best comparison I can think of really is sort of like One Nation and Pauline Hanson.
Yeah.
That's kind of the best sort of comparison that we can make there. So here we are at an election where it seems like they're being talked about anyway is actually taking government.
Very much considered a far-right party. They say they've capitalised on anger at Macron over the high cost of living, growing concerns over immigration. Claire, just to round out this, what they're voting on now is their National Assembly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like the US system, I guess. You get president and you get the Congress. Emmanuel Macron isn't up for election. He's the president and he's still continuing in his term. This is their National Assembly. So it's really the parliament that has control of, that legislative wing of the government.
Yeah, Macron will stay president until 2027 regardless of the outcome, but it could mean an interesting couple of years if these opposite parties in president and prime minister are at play. They vote on Sunday.
Yep, Sunday night our time. There's 2 rounds of voting in that election. So this is the second round. It's really the decider, just in case you've been sort of following along.
Going, haven't we had this vote already?
Yeah, second round. So a result, and we'll know exactly what is happening into the future, sort of Tuesday-ish.
A look now at the week in news and what's coming up. Tonight, a big one for rugby union. The Wallaroos, our women's team, are playing Fiji at 4:45, and then the Wallabies will take on Wales at 7:45, both games in Sydney.
Yes, we should say for our listeners in the West, those are, of course, Eastern times. I know we've got a prejudice for the East, but yes, sorry, that is absolutely happening later in the afternoon if you're in the West. Mm-hmm. And look, the Wallabies have had a really tough time of late. Some say disastrous, of course. The World Cup last year led to their coach Eddie Jones resigning. That included a 40-6 loss to Wales. So maybe they're, looking for retribution.
Revenge,
I don't know.
Rugby Australia are calling it the start of a new era. The Wallabies have had 7 captains this year.
Yeah, 7 captains. The current or the new one for tonight is Liam Wright. It's also the first game for the new coach, who is Joe Schmidt. So yeah, maybe it is a new era. Fingers crossed for them.
Coming up on Sunday, a couple of big events. The second round of voting for the French elections is happening, as we said. Also, the start of NIDOC Week.
Yep. NIDOC Week is the sort of week where we look at the history and culture of Indigenous Australians. Plenty of events happening nationwide. If you're interested in that, we'll put a link in the episode notes, Larissa, so people can go and find an event local to them.
Mm-hmm. It is also World Chocolate Day.
Oh, yeah.
Yum.
Good. I like these food themes days. They're great.
We've definitely got our favourites.
Yeah.
We decided we're not up for World Legume Day, but World Potato Day, we're on board. World Spice Day, we're on board. Savvy Bee Day, we're on board.
Savvy Bee Day, yeah, exactly right. Recommendations for World Chocolate Day?
Yes, I will talk about that when we talk about our recommendations.
Radio.
Got a good one. Moving on to Tuesday, Ash Barty is sort of back. She's going to be playing a friendlies doubles game at Wimbledon with her former tennis partner, Casey Delacroix. Don't know the exact time that they'll be playing, but that'll be confirmed on Sunday.
Yeah, I probably am like a lot of people who saw these headlines saying Ash Barty returns to Wimbledon.
No.
It was a bit misleading, wasn't it?
Yes.
She's just doing a friendly thing. But, of course, so many people love watching her play. So, that'll be really exciting. You're a huge tennis fan, Larissa. Are you in, even if it's sort of middle of the night kind of territory?
I also love my sleep, but if it is the middle of the night, I will catch up on it later. But yes, she is not coming back to being a professional tennis player anymore. She's focused on being a mum. Her baby just turned 1, actually. That popped up on my Insta feed.
Name?
I couldn't tell you, but she made a hedgehog cake for him, and he looks a lot like her.
Oh, well, that's good.
Happy birthday to Ash Barty's little bub.
Yeah, fantastic.
Before we move on from tennis, one thing to note, lots of farewells for Andy Murray, of course, one of the greats. It's his final Wimbledon. He didn't play singles, and he and his brother just lost their doubles round to 2 Aussies, John Peers and Rinky Hijikata. Good for the Aussies.
Yeah.
Sad to see Murray bow out there. He's got one more match to go in the mixed doubles with Emma Raducanu. So, yeah, a bit of tennis history as we see another one of those changing of the guards happening.
Yeah, and lots of questions, of course, over your favourite Rafael Nadal, whether he's going to continue or not.
I think the Olympics might see him wrap up, but
yeah, it really is a turning of the page, isn't it, when it comes to it? Also on Tuesday, it's the day that the leaders of NATO countries are going to meet in Washington, D.C. It's a 3-day summit. Big on the agenda, of course, is war on Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukraine has been keen to join NATO for a number of years now. They aren't a member at the moment. It's a bit of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. But President Zelensky is actually attending that summit. There's a hope of furthering those membership talks, so keep an eye out for that.
One of the first jobs for UK's new PM, Keir Starmer, will be attending that summit. Talk about hitting the ground running.
Yeah, not going, though, is Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. He actually copped a bit of heat for that this week. The Defence Minister, Richard Marles, is going to represent us. He says that it's important to be there even if we're just an observer nation.
Yeah, because, of course, we aren't a part of NATO either. Moving on to Wednesday, it's the 2024 Australia Wind Energy Conference in Melbourne. On Thursday, another World Day, World Population Day.
Also, when we get to Friday, it's the Darwin Fringe Festival that kicks off, as well as the Boulia camel races, which are in outback Queensland.
It's called Australia's richest camel race. Don't know what the second richest does. Why doesn't it get a run?
Well, isn't the oh no, it's the Everest in Sydney that's the richest horse race. They make a big deal out of that. Maybe I feel like I should know what the Boulia camel races are.
Boulia's moment in the sun, the richest camel races. Stand by for that one. Sounds like a good time.
It sure does.
On to our recommendations now, Claire. Both you and I have been enjoying Austin on ABC iView.
Yeah, we have. I am about 4 deep into it, playing it on iView. It's been a really good thing on the weekend as I'm doing a bit of ironing. I've quite enjoyed that. It's got some big names in it.
Can't believe you still iron. Sorry. Who irons these days?
Yes, that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? But really the person to point to is Michael Theo.
Yeah.
He was on Love on the Spectrum. He was an absolute
favourite.
audience favourite out of that. He's playing the son of the show, and basically it's about him reconnecting with his biological father. He's neurodivergent. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's set in Canberra, got a ton of recognisable faces. 27-minute episodes, our sweet spot. We love it.
Just love that format. It's just so good. Speaking of sweet spots, nice little segue, World Chocolate Day.
Yeah, World Chocolate Day.
Your recommendation?
I discovered a gorgeous little chocolate brand called Miss Peacock's Chocolates on a little girls' trip down to Mittagong in New South Wales recently. But they do deliver Australia-wide, which is why I wanted to recommend it. So if you're after a bit of a treat for yourself or a really lovely gift for someone, they are expensive, but they are amazing. I will pop a link to that in your episode notes. Squiz Press, Claire, we put out a trailer for Newsmakers this week. First episode is out on Wednesday. Give us the spiel.
Look, where we're starting around Newsmakers is we've had a really good time so far talking to people who do news, not just anyone, but some really notable people who are actually behind the scenes. Why are we getting reporting in a certain way, or how does that actually work, like when it comes to reporting from Israel, that kind of stuff. What we've really lent into is this sort of theme at the moment about times being quite uncertain for publishers. Of course, we've talked quite a bit in recent times about AI and when it comes to media news bargaining codes with Meta. Credible journalism is a really important thing. So this series really is lifting the curtain again about how news is made, why it's important, why we need to know exactly what it is that's happening in our world and how we support those who are doing really good jobs at doing it.
Yeah, so it's an interview series where we'll be talking to these newsmakers, as it says in the title. First episode is an interview with Nick Shelton, the founder and CEO of Broadsheet.
Yeah, Nick is a real star when it comes to Australian publishing. From scratch, he started one of the biggest publishing businesses in Australia in the independent side of things. So he's a really impressive bloke, and I think you'll really enjoy hearing about how he does community news, culture news, of course, restaurants and events and all that kind of stuff. It's a wonderful business, Broadsheet.
That first episode will be out in the News Club feed on Wednesday. We'll also have a newsletter that follows along with that. That about wraps us up for Weekly Wrap. Claire, it's been a pleasure to join you while Kate's on holidays.
Thanks for spending the time on Weekly Wrap with us again, Larissa.
Kate will be back next weekend, of course, and across that interview series that's out this week. Have a great weekend.